So, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be here in this digital connected world. We have David Kim of Sony, who's wrangling all the different heads of Sony for crossover into the video game industry. John Eberhardt of Wizard of the Coast, Magic the Gathering, is now wrestling monsters inside Magic the Gathering, that new crossover. Lance Priebe, formerly of Club Penguin, now of Rocket Snail and Box Critters and Games, his own board game company as well, which had a huge hit on Kickstarter. And Neil Chandran, formerly of Flight Deck, which was a 3D interactive device, and now of ViRSE. And myself, I've done everything from wargaming to mobile games to startups and Kickstarters and everything that crosses over to toys and product design as well. So we are going to get started here, and I'm hoping these guys are online because we are going to see their faces here shortly. There we go. I see that ViRSE is muted though, but Lance and John and David are here. And there we go. We've got videos on one. The rest of the guys will hopefully put their faces up here shortly as well too on that part. But the first question we had, and we discussed this quite a bit actually in our meeting last week, was how we're going to define IP and brand, and what does it mean to the company and to the individual. So I'm going to start off and ask David first to answer that question, then John, then Lance, and then Neil. So David Kim, if you can answer that question to you, what is Sony define as IP and or brand, and how do they look at it?
So I think when you really think about it in the most simplest terms, an IP is essentially a collection of ideas. You know, whether it's a script, whether it's a video game, you know, whether it's a movie, TV show, book, whatever, it's essentially at its core a collection of ideas. And then how that relates to brand is that brand and branding, if you've done it correctly, is a shorthand for the audience that you're trying to reach to communicate the entirety of that IP and all the ideas contained within. So if you think about something like, you know, a movie like Ghostbusters, right? When you say Ghostbusters as a brand, it brings all kinds of ideas into your mind if you're familiar with it, whether it's, you know, proton traps, you know, proton blasters, Stay Puft, you know, Slimer, the Ecto-1, New York City, the Firehouse. It really is a way of, you know, kind of encapsulating a bunch of ideas in a simple phrase.
Awesome. I appreciate that. John?
I would agree with that from the standpoint that really IP is about trying to bring together a collection of not only communal thoughts, but also really it's a way to go ahead and pull together all of the different concepts that really establish a broader ecosystem from the standpoint of knowing that there's something way deeper. Every time that everyone looks at something that's an IP, they can say, oh, I can imagine myself in all of this because it's just a wedge of that pie. The brand itself is that little icon that really identifies it and dreams up the entire universe, or at least symbolizes the whole universe. For the sake of Magic, it's the back of the card. For the sake of Dungeons and Dragons, it's a 20-sided die. It's that type of iconography that really represents the tip of that iceberg.
I appreciate that. Lance?
My thoughts are I usually start with brand because I feel that's usually where you start. Brand is something you create. It's the relationship between yourself, the creatives, and the property, or the story, the world, and the characters, and the fans and how they interact with that property. That bond creates memories, relationships, smells, sights, sounds, etc. Which, of course, in like if you look at Coca-Cola and all them, you think of Coca-Cola as this cool, refreshing drink on a warm summer day on a beach, because most of us have that memory. We've associated the two together, and we get this positive thing. Myself personally, I take intellectual property in its literal term of intellectual property as something of value and sale, and we build our businesses around. But that value comes from the audience's relationship to the brand. And as that grows, we can create financial models and business models around it. A little harsh definition, but yeah, I see the two as the two hands, the relationship with the customers and the business of our industry.
Okay, I appreciate it as well too. Neil.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with everybody here. But I think that the product, the IP is what it is, and the brand is how you feel from a consumer standpoint, and how how that product makes you or how the product makes you feel. The IP is something that is more tangibly attributable to valuation wise as well, potentially, I believe. And then the brand is really the goodwill associated with that, and where that company is positioned in a consumer's mind. Both extremely important, but different ways to quantify and evaluate.
So what do you feel is not an IP or a brand?
Well, I think that it's tough to IP could be actually even the reuse or the brand the application of someone else's IP, as in the case of these various game engines and products. So basically, you can create IP out of somebody else's IP, either with credit or without, and that obviously bodes the legal questions associated with licensing and such, right? I think IP pretty much can be whatever you can, claim is originated or a value added from one's own efforts. And brand-wise, I think the trademarks, the copyrights, any of the visual or sort of any of the characteristics exclusive to that brand, sort of fall into that pocket, which is kind of why counterfeiting and fakes are, really sort of protected or are defended against by legitimate brands.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. David, what do you feel is not an IP or a brand that somebody might create?
Well, that's kind of tough to answer. It's kind of like saying, don't think about the monkey in the room. All you're going to do is think about the monkey in the room, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I guess going back to, let's say, an example of, Coca-Cola, right? So what isn't part of that IP would be the can or the bottle. Well, actually, the bottle is actually a part of that IP if you take the iconic shape that they trademarked and patented. What would be so that wouldn't be part of the brand or the IP, right? Because the aluminum can is a generic thing, but it's part of the product, right? You don't have the product without it. Sorry, my cat just bit me.
No worries.
So, and then what is not part of the brand is, man, it's kind of hard to say. Again, you revert to the can or something that's generic, right? I mean, generally, what's not part of an IP or brand from a legal standpoint is something that's, so generic that you can't actually qualify it as being distinct and unique to that particular IP or brand.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. John, to ask you this, the same thing as well, too, as I know that Wizards of the Coast has gone after lots of different aspects to the creation of Magic the Gathering, even to the whole aspect of tapping on cards. But for you guys, what is not considered brand or IP when you guys create?
I would say something that is kind of like everyone else has said, so broadly defined. Lance, I'm going to kind of go back to one of the things that you were talking about. IP is about something that you can trademark. If it's something that you can't trademark, or if it's something that falls outside of IP law, then it's still a universe, but it's not something that is really IP. It's not something that's really identifiable as something that is unique to that overall brand, that overall experience, something that is, let's say, open source, if you will, a flag for a country. That is something that is arguably a brand, but it's not an IP because it represents too many different things to too many different people.
Gotcha. I appreciate that as well, too. Lance, this question is for you. And then we'll go to Neil and then John and David with this as well. How does your company execute on brand awareness right now with community?
Oh my, brand awareness. So as I shared, I believe brands is the relationship between your product or your IP and your fans or customers. The spin off actually your previous question of what is not a brand or an IP. Before video games, I was actually in marketing and graphic design. And I was always amazed that people thought that creating a logo and slapping on your store became a brand. I said, well, that's not a brand. You haven't built a relationship yet. So to this question of community and building up brands, it's right part of it. So with Club Penguin and children's entertainment and different properties I've worked on, that conversation that we have with our audience at all times, be it the voice you give away, hey, we're working on an update, this is what we're doing. It's very engaging. It's very the truth is it's not a two-way conversation, but you always try to place it in such a wording that it is, because the simple fact is there's a million children and they're all writing you, so you can't actually answer everyone, but you try your best to talk to the voice that's coming back and forth, and you sound like you're listening, and we take our feedback and listen as well as we can. And that link that we found in our media was the part that started to endear audiences to your property and create a brand. There's a relationship that starts to happen. What I found is whenever we just put out an ad or notice or a blog post that says updates to features, there's no relationship there. But if you just simply tone it in such a manner that our customer support teams are engaged in saying, hey, seeking your feedback or asking questions, or we heard you, the audience, that you were looking for this direction, and these are the features we've been adding, and we've been considering carefully your ideas, that just creates unbelievable engagement that we found with our virtual worlds and MMOs. Hope that helped.
Okay.
Seth.
That does on that part. So Neil, I'm gonna let you bring in this same question, but you do physical product as well. I mean, you've created.
Well, that's actually I actually spoke about the session before the one prior to this, and I actually gave a little demo of what our product does. And what we've done, which is part of the reason I wanted to be on this panel, I thought, and I noticed that you and and you were moderating, Seth, so I nudged for it.
I appreciate that.
Was that we have essentially used gaming technologies to create a environment that allows brands to be interacted with by consumers before they buy the real life good. And I was actually going to see right there if I was able to do a screen share into my window, but well, actually I probably could if you don't mind for just 1 second, because that might show a little bit. That might give us a little bit more clarity of what we're doing here, or of how we. Here we go. Now I can do that. And there we go. So what we've done, for example, I don't know if that's taken my. I don't know if you can see that.
Sure.
But what we've done is we have taken models of branded items, or we create models of branded items, or generate those assets so that users can essentially use the game mechanic to see how those items might look in their real life use case. So we have, for example, all these items which are from particular brands, and we've created sort of a configuration tool that's part of this virtual world experience that we've created, but it's really got the value of being I can stop sharing screen now, and the value there is that it allows us to how do I stop sharing now? Here we go. Let's stop the share. It allows us to promote brands directly within this kind of game environment. And although it's not necessarily a shooter game or action game where people are running around shooting each other, our vision is that brands could be leveraging this platform and what something that we as game developers and gamers are very we think of as very commonplace. But for, non-gamers and for, e-commerce and online shoppers, we're seeing this actually being done also by other companies. We're not the only one sort of with this idea. Wayfair, for example, which is the big furniture and home goods manufacturer, they use a room configurator solution, and there's a couple of others out there. So I think we're going to see more brand utility now. Now that is different than Fortnite, for example, where you do see brands advertise on games, sort of like banner advertising. But I think that we're going to see, particularly in this environment where people are there is no other content being produced or being consumed because they can't produce video and production in Hollywood now. So I think we're going to see more of a branded game and simulation type stuff come to market should this environment continue, and even if it doesn't.
No, I appreciate that as well too, and that type of awareness. Which, so David, I'll push this off to you as well too, because in this aspect of building up community, Neil brought up Fortnite. They of course have teamed up with Nerf. There are Nerf guns now based around Fortnite as well too. But Sony's done a lot with its brands to build awareness within its community. How do you guys look at that?
It's a multi-pronged, process, right? You have your traditional marketing and advertising. Then you also have, which are, one way, as Lance said, it's communicating out to your audience. Then you have social media channels where there's a little bit more interaction, but it's still fairly, one way. And then we also use things like games to help expand that relationship with the audience. And, one of the things we focus on when it comes to using video games to enhance that relationship is it's really important that the games accurately capture and reflect what it is about the IP that consumers really love. I think that's vital. If you put out a game that doesn't match consumer expectations, chances are it won't do well. But it also, depending on how bad the disconnect is, can actually harm the relationship with the consumers because they feel you don't understand the IP.
Sure, but with Sony, is there other ways that they do awareness outreach to its community besides just gaming around their IPs? Do they plan that across the board?
Well, like I said, you have your traditional advertising and marketing, you have your social media. We do events occasionally. Last year it was the 35th anniversary of Ghostbusters. We did a huge Ghostbusters fan fest on the lot. You try and reach your audience and your fans in as many ways as possible. The only thing that's really key with all your outreach, though, is that you have to understand the way that your fans see the brand, what their perception of the brand is, and your messaging has to be in line with that perception. Otherwise, you do run the risk of harming that relationship because the consumer's just going to feel like you don't understand me anymore. And this is kind of what happened to Star Wars, right? There's been a lot of backlash because people felt that the people who are now running the IP and the brand, the fans felt that they didn't understand what it was, what the brand and IP really was anymore.
I appreciate that as well too. That's absolutely correct. John, I'm going to throw this question as well to you for WotC. And then of course we had discussed this beforehand a little bit, but since last Thursday, Wizards of the Coast for Magic the Gathering has now added Godzilla and monsters into Magic. So with that being said, so how is that for executing brand awareness within its community? Technically, I don't think Godzilla's ever been in Magic the Gathering. Is that a deviation that will be great, or how did you guys plan for that, if I may ask?
Well, first off, just to echo some of the other thoughts, as soon as you start to NASCAR the side of whatever game you've got or whatever kind of property you're on, you lose the trust. You lose the trust of the audience from the standpoint that it just becomes clear that you are use whatever kind of metaphor you want, putting lipstick on a pig, trying to go ahead and shell everything out, that's not what you want to do. You want to go ahead and keep core to the central experience. For the sake of the Toho brand that we brought in, as far as having Godzilla in the game, Ikoria was always going to be about monsters. It's always been called Lair of Behemoths. It's all about friggin' gigantic monsters that will go ahead and rip your head off. Sound like anything else? Honestly,
right on.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing came out of the fact that last year we did some of the Japanese alt art planeswalkers, and it was incredibly popular. People loved it. They loved not only the experience, they loved getting those unique cards and those unique art pieces that absolutely fit in with everything that we're doing. Ikoria, it just kind of came about from the standpoint that somebody said, it'd be pretty cool if, as far as these monsters, we actually had these huge reptilian beasts that everybody else knows. I don't know if I can legally use the word kaiju, but basically have these huge
It's generic. You
beasts.
Can use it. Yeah.
All right. I'm not going to get a call from my legal department after this.
You should get a legal. No, it's not trademarked on that part. Absolutely. But you guys were aware of your community outside of North America that had a love for these, and you've brought it now into it, which now affects, of course, other areas as well too.
Absolutely. And on top of that, what we did, again, with each one of these cards, we made sure that the particular beast, the particular monster that's coming in, makes sense with the narrative of the card. So these are alts for the card. Each one of these creatures, they have the standard rule set that's there, but then they also have this alternative art that is just those specialty cards. The funnier fact, trust me on this one, don't have a card that talks about Space Godzilla with the Corona of Death, because you might regret that one given world circumstances, but pick that one up if you can, because we're not going to reprint that.
Right. 100 years from now, it'll be very highly collectible on that part as well too. Absolutely. Okay, so this next question is going to go out, and I'm going to have David answer first, then John, then Lance, and then Neil. And the question is this: how should you determine the next steps that your company should do for the brand or IP development? Should you do it in-house, print on demand, or should you find a licensing partner, a entertainment company to help you out with it? What are those next steps, or how should you perceive your brand to see if you're ready for those next steps? So David, you're on.
That's a tough question, because it really depends on where your brand is at the moment, right? If you want to start entertaining the idea of doing, say, films or TVs based shows based on your brand better be pretty big already. Or it's got to have some kind of really interesting creative hook that it can translate into being a film or TV show without, needing the fans from your current existing brand. And then you run the risk of, your brand's no longer going to be what it originally was. It's now going to be defined by this new thing. I think some of the other stuff you're talking about, whether it's sort of extending through physical merchandise, I think that's something that's fairly easy to do. You can do it now, especially with things like print on demand in even smaller quantities. So you can super serve a specific, portion of an audience. You don't have to necessarily have it be mass, because you need to produce some kind of insane minimum run that you're never going to sell through at your current size. And then you have to, warehouse everything. But, you really have to look at, where's your brand at? How big is your audience? Where is your audience? What else is your audience into? Because I think that's the whole idea of the crossover, right? With what Magic did with, Toho and all the Godzilla universe, is there's a lot of crossover there between fans of those two brands. So it makes sense. We've done stuff like that before. Last year we did Ghostbusters and Transformers. There's a lot of overlap in those fans, because they're both, in fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, both IPs were born in like 1986. So they literally shared the same birthday in terms of a year. And, as a result, like a lot of the fan base were fans of both, because it was like nostalgic to them being a kid. So the crossover helped both enhance both brands and also kind of expanded both brands into, related fan bases.
Okay. I appreciate that very much. Actually, I'm going to skip over. So Lance, I'm going to ask you this question now, but I would like to, if you can, chat about how you guys are using this with box splitters.
Okay. Oh, can you quickly remind when is a property ready for going to other mediums?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a tough question. I love being a designer and a creative. So of course, whenever the shiny object passes across my desk and the laser light shines on the floor, I'm after chasing it and pursuing it and being completely distracted. Now, from a business point of view, that's not always the best thing. I think it's good for the creatives and the designers to be considering where your property might exist in the long term or the full vision of a property. But the timing of when it should or should not do that is very important. You need to be, there's two parts to it. Your team or your experts or yourself, it's got to be right. It's got to feel right. Now, the problem, of course, with that is a lot of times we have the wrong, I used to formerly work with Disney and other things. We go to these large meetings with lots of experts and they say that this is what we should do. But the reality is once we did it, it didn't perform very well. So, because sometimes your opinions aren't always the best. Where I'm trying to go with that one is, and then there's testing. So how can you validate each of these markets and how can you see if there is an opportunity for some of these things? My new property is called Box Critters. It's the next evolution of Club Penguin. It's just how do I deal with this generation of children and their virtual worlds and experiences and how they want persistent play. And I'm exploring opportunities of where could it go with merchandise and toys, as it's something I strongly believe will be the driving factor of the entire property. But where to go first is the toughest part. And that's where I'm trying to listen a lot to the fans. I'm digging through a lot of fan sites and just trying to see what they're doing. Like, what are they expressing themselves with? Are they making toys? Are they drawing pictures? What are they asking for? How are they expressing their love of the property already? With 100,000 players already, I can dig through various Instagrams and different channels, and I can see the birthday cakes being made. I can see each of the things. So I'm starting to grow as to, well, where will the right property, right crossover exist? I hope that helps. It's not clear. I'm of course approaching it as the artist, and then I have to go to the industry and then see what's feasible, because going out and molding plastic and hitting a target audience and putting yourself in a store for a particular age group might not be the right time today. I may not have enough information to know that is the audience that will purchase. But I see it as experimentation is how I see it. But I'm very familiar. I've worked with larger IP holders, and there's a lot of discipline to how to get things to market.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate that very much. John, sir, that's up for you now.
I'm going to answer it in two different ways. First one, because it amuses me, and second one, because it's a real answer.
Awesome.
The easiest way to go ahead and put out a fire is to drop a big ass log on top of some smoldering embers. Because if it's not ready for it, it will go ahead and put that fire out. As far as the way that trying to launch a new brand or launch a new idea, it still comes down to the triangle. In this case, the triangle is about the idea, the community, and really the marketing behind it, or at least the messaging behind it. And if you grow any of those out of proportion with one another, it's not going to take off. You've got to have something that you build up the interest level slowly over time, so that there is an interest level in the very deep and rich universe that you've built out. And then you have the campaign behind it. If you have something that launches with too much hype in the first place, people won't come to it because they're going to feel like it's being shoved down their throats. If people come to something where there's not a deep backstory or deep sense of content to it, they're not going to stick around for long enough to go ahead and not only realize your investment, but also the investment of everyone else that's put their time and effort into it.
Right.
And if you don't have the community, you might have the greatest thing in the world, but nobody's going to stick around, and therefore it's only going to exist for as long as that paid advertising is around.
Yep. No, I absolutely agree with you on that part. Neil, that question now is for you. For you guys, how do you find that next step to grow your brand, your product?
Um, well, that's kind of the that is kind of the tightrope that we and many brands have companies need to walk, which is, at what point are you even going to be successful at engaging them? If we had gone to market too early, if we had tried, it's the chicken and egg situation, right? Because if you try to outreach too early, you don't have enough to hook them with. But also, on the other hand, if you do need them to be to be successful. I couldn't help when you asked the initial question, or when John was answering, I couldn't help but think of something non-gaming related, an entity non-gaming related, which are the Kardashians.
Right.
And I hate to bring up that word here on this panel, but it's not gaming, but they've done a marvelous job of sort of matching their launches with their continued notoriety or sort of publicity as a brand. And the example is this Kylie Jenner Kardashian, what was it? Yeah, that's how, who just did the cosmetics line. And because of what she had sort of created and leveraged, boom, it goes to $1 billion upon launch. So that, I think, is a very extreme example of leveraging one's existing brand and launching products. But I think the idea is right, is that you're basically cultivating this prospect base and audience at the same time as you're prototyping products and pushing them out. And if you can, and if that can be optimized, it can be very successful.
Absolutely.
It's 2020. You have to say the horse people of the apocalypse when talking about
Yes.
the Kardashians.
That is true on that part. Absolutely. I believe we are now into our Q&A session on this part, and I believe Dave is going to send over some questions. I'm now first question here. To Neil, are the branded products limited editions, and how can people make money from ViRSE? Is this question to you?
The branded products. Okay, so one of the topics actually that I didn't want to talk on this one yet, but because there's a round table tomorrow, and also because this is a sensitive area, which is in terms of regulatory. We actually use a blockchain-based ledger system for tracking the actual goods and the virtual items. And that's actually not quite ready yet. So yes, every virtual branded object in our universe is cataloged. And that's an important economic sort of, that's an important sort of feature for what it is we're doing. And in terms of how we make money, is we do a revenue share with any of the asset or property owned brand owners. So if people do buy the virtual version of somebody's good, there is a relationship with the owner of that IP to share it with them. So essentially, we position ourselves as a retailer or a middleman in that transaction, and our commission or fee covers the cost of maintaining all of this infrastructure that's needed to display all the stuff and house all the assets and the participants. That's how we modeled it.
Okay. Gotcha. David, this one's for you. For Sony, how does Sony look at a partner who wants to get a license with you guys?
Well, first of all, generally we start with asking any interested partners, conceptually, what is it you want to do with the IP, right? What's the game concept at a high level? If we feel that the idea is good, it fits with the IP and the brand, and then the next question we ask is, well, are you capable of executing on this idea properly? Assuming that that's also the case, then, we would go to, discussion of business terms. If we can come to an agreement on that level, then, then we would proceed with the deal.
Okay. I'm going to ask this question. What are you looking at for personally? What do you think makes a great, in this case, pitch? Is it the team itself or their idea?
It has to be both. I mean, you can have a great idea, but if you can't execute on it, then it's going to fail. At the same time, you can have a great team, but if they don't have the right idea for the IP, then it's not going to succeed either. So it needs to be both. Okay.
Absolutely. John, I had a quick question for you in regards to WotC and the future of WotC on this part. If you can answer it. Strange Loop, which just came out on Netflix, just launched their board game on Kickstarter. But prior to that, they were an art book that went to an RPG. And that's how they kind of built their brand. Wizards of the Coast is known, of course, for RPGs and everything else. Is there any future with WotC going into television with any of its ideas, concepts?
I think if there is, we're going to want to do it the right way rather than the way that some of the early D&D films came out, even when TSR had the brand. I think it comes down to a quality launch on something, because it's even the same case with the games that we've got right now. Just because you've got an IP doesn't mean that it is a license to turn crank for money, because eventually that crank will break if you're trying to turn it on something that is just junk that comes out. Even though I love Jeremy Irons, that was one time I didn't need Jeremy Irons.
Gotcha.
But I mean, even when you take a look at it, if anyone saw the commercial that came out last year, it was from a Brazilian car company that did a live action version of the 80s cartoons of Dungeons and Dragons. It was fantastic. It was something that we all shared around the company, because I think everyone, not only in the community, but also in the building, wants to see those things done. We would love to go ahead and have that stuff done. Again, we're just doing it, or we will do it with the right partnerships and the right ideas behind it.
Okay. And John, I just had another question pop up for you. Hobby stores are suffering badly at the moment as a major outlet for MTG. How do you think they will recover, assuming they can survive?
We're doing everything that we can. We're doing everything we can to partner with the hobby shops from the standpoint of doing a lot of the Friday Night Magic events with them. We're giving them codes. We are doing everything that we can to go ahead and support them. In the case of the Ikoria launch, we're doing something as far as the timing of the paper when it comes out. If things continue as they are, we're going to do everything we can to empower those local hobby shops, really try to help them build out the idea of delivering to their consumers, basically, whether it's curbside or direct delivery. That is our lifeblood. That's our lifeblood, not only from the standpoint of the business, but more importantly, again, for the players. So it is extremely important to us. We're coming up with plans to go ahead and invest as much as we can, and in as many ways as we can, with the local hobby shops.
Okay. I appreciate that very much. Lance, I had a quick question for you in regards to Club Penguin, of course, the heydays right before Copa, then after Copa. How do you engage with an audience that's younger, especially with box critters?
Oh.
Because that's building a brand, an IP. I mean, that's an age group that is more self-aware online than at any time in the world, but you still have parents.
They're actually a highly engaged audience. They're consuming content unbelievably fast. The key here is to understand that usually children, this is a blanket statement because some of them are getting their own phones, etc. But you have to always remember that the younger audience tends not to own the platform or device that they're accessing the game or product from or with. So you need to be where they are. So I'm not recommending that TikTok is for young kids, but there's a lot of them on it. YouTube is doing some interesting new changes. These children haven't left these platforms. You just need to be on it and speaking to them and speaking what they're looking for. It was very popular in Club Penguin just to do endless music videos of penguins doing funny things and dancing and making music. The view counts are in the millions and millions and millions. You can get a lot of your messages across through these videos. Just short little, hey, the theming was pretty simple. We're encouraging kids to be with their imagination, gather in group with their friends, hang out, play. So the pattern, we just kept going around and around and around. And they would engage, but you had to be everywhere. You never knew if they were on their mother's phone or their neighbor's laptop, or we had enough anecdotal stories of just people gathering. Actually, I wrote in my design document, because we never did it, unbelievable numbers of kids all sitting around one desktop. So we never conceived the idea, like in one of the Nintendos with Mario had the helper play model or something, where the other person played the other character. Those types of ideas need to be explored and understand. Like I've watched my daughter at school, and all the girls are sitting on the bench at the basketball team. Every single one of them has the exact same mobile game out, playing a single player game, laughing at each other, talking, the whole team. So you got to look at these patterns and understand how they're playing, engaging. There are rules where you can't just write to them, address them, talk to them. You can't have a Zoom call like this, etc., like that. So there's a lot of rules, but they're listening, they're hearing, and they're loud. They put everything online.
Yes, they do. Absolutely. Okay, and we are at, I believe, time. Dave, is that correct?
Actually, you're okay, Seth. If there are more questions, or if there's anything to go, we built in a little bit of buffer time, so we can go on for a couple more minutes. That's okay.
Okay,
it's the
good.
secret voice.
Sure.
Oh yeah. I'm here. Don't, just kind of in the background. So.
We're actually replaying The Wizard of Oz. He is the man behind the curtain. Right there.
Cool.
Absolutely. This question was actually about branded avatars and clothes, but in fact, actually, I'll put it over to everybody really quick, because you all have platforms that could tie into branded items out there. For example, there could be a Nike Godzilla on a trading card if you wanted to, type of thing. John, you had talked about, don't crank that moneymaker machine too hard, or it breaks. But for your companies, for the four of you, where is that middle ground where it's potentially okay to cross over to that brand? And I'll do it this way. I'll let David, you go first, and then John, then Lance, and Neil.
Sure.
So I guess it really depends. If you're talking about a brand coming into the universe of our IP, then it has to be a brand that makes sense in that universe. Okay. Right. So, if it's easier if it's something that's current, modern day, versus something that's obviously set way in the past or way in the future. As far as going in the other direction of putting our IPs into other branded items, it's probably more of a look at the audience fit, right? Is the audience for our IP the same as, or, have a significant overlap with the audience for that particular, external brand?
Okay.
If it makes sense, then we'll do those deals. If if there's not good overlap, then it doesn't really make sense for either side, and you probably wouldn't move forward.
Okay, I appreciate that, John.
One of the favorite events that we had in Arena was, I think it was last Valentine's Day. We had Day 9 versus Danny Trejo. We had avatars for both of them, so we had Danny Trejo, and Reddit, as it tends to do, went nuts saying, I want to buy the Danny Trejo. We looked at things like that and saying, where are we going to be with that 24 months from now, 48 months from now? Is it going to really stick out like a sore thumb? No offense to Danny Trejo. Good Lord, I think I've just put a contract out on my life.
A machete, yes, you have.
Exactly. As far as something that is going to be brought in as to any kind of license or any kind of IP, it's got to be something that will still be understandable and not stick out in a bad way within the license over time. So it's got to be something that still is complementary to the overall experience, rather than just a shameless cash grab. That's
a good piece of wisdom. I appreciate that. Lance?
Oh, wow. Before Club Penguin ended, a lot of the Disney was beginning to do what they called takeovers, which the audience struggled with. And I think it was a lot of positioning of how the wording was done. An example was, if you guys remember when Frozen came out, the Frozen promotional for the movie was, of course, integrated into Club Penguin, which makes sense. It's a Frozen world, Frozen characters, Frozen everything. And of course, it's a tough one. So in a Club Penguin instance, or a virtual world or an MMO, you are entering that person's universe. Of course, they own it. It's their space, their character, their environment, their friends. And there was this pushback of, Frozen took away my home, yet I'm in love with Frozen. So it was this tension. Business-wise, you guys said printing the machine or something like that. It made more money that month in subscriptions than you can ever imagine. Those Elsa dresses, just like in real life, just sold like crazy. And of course, they brought back more Frozen parties. But there was a lot of, it didn't quite fit with everyone. So to have a full takeover for 30 days in someone's environment where they want to hang out with their friends and don't want to participate in Frozen was difficult. They were pushed out of their own little environment. But the people, of course, that were in love with Frozen adored the content and went through it. So I haven't been able to do a deep dive into this study as to what a solution would be, but you do have to honor that audience that they want a property a certain way, or that relationship, again, the brand, they have a trust, a relationship of how they believe their memories and everything are associated with something. And then you changed it. So it had this, it was interesting. A lot of angry fans made a lot of money.
Right. There's a balance there. I appreciate that. Neil, how do you guys plan on doing that with ViRSE?
Well, we've actually, I mean, that's sort of our core business model, plan. So the idea is to utilize scale drawings, scale models of both environments and avatars, so that there can be more utility, a utility play with the brands, as well as sort of a promotional play. So for example, if somebody wears a certain size of clothing, they can use that simulation aspect. And then in approaching the brands, we can say, hey, you know what, this is a way to help with the whole online shopping problem of sizes, or improve that. So we try to basically make it make sense for like I said, the environment, especially with the environment that we're living in, where we can't exactly go try stuff on in a store. So we try to assist in that regard. Again, our product sort of was born from the idea of optimizing configurations of products and it started with architectural, furniture and interior design. Clothing is more difficult, obviously, because of the non-rigid aspect, aspect of it. But even with many products, like for example, like cars, you can configure a solution for a client, and then sort of let them play with it before they go online. So that's sort of what our vision is.
That sounds awesome. I appreciate that very much.